going great, and they're only getting better.
Welcome back to Public Speaking 111, and this is Danielle, and we're going to do Chapter 16, which is Speaking for Special Occasions. At the end of this unit, you should be able to explain how the nature of speaking, occasion, and the purpose influence what you do in your speech. Should be able to apply decorum to your speech crafting and delivery. Should be able to explain the nature of deliberative and ceremonial speaking and identify speeches that contain both deliberative and ceremonial characteristics. You should be able to know what kind of speeches have both. So that's where we're going. The essence then of this chapter is the rhetorical triangle. You might remember this from earlier in the semester. The rhetorical triangle, author, audience, with that message in there. And then, of course, author is the same thing as speaker, right? And then where we're focusing today is on the occasion at the top of that triangle. And we want to make sure that the occasion matches the speech, and the speech matches the occasion. And we don't want a bad match, kind of like haute couture in a junkyard. It's got to fit. It's got to fit. So not like this. So there are three premises to making sure that the speech and the occasion fit together well. The first premise is that speeches are given for special occasions and unlike, or specific occasions, and unlike literature, which is meaningful regardless of the circumstances, speeches achieve their power by responding effectively to the particular occasion, right? So think about that frame of reference and the context of the situation that we talked about in the communication model. That it has a lot to do with a special occasion speech being useful or meaningful. Even standard occasion speeches such as graduation, which is, it's a special occasion, but it happens fairly often for a special occasion. Even so, they have to fit the context. Now, those occasions create constraints. Think about a eulogy, which is the speech that we get at a funeral. It imposes the constraints of the occasion and the family's wishes, as well as the wishes of the deceased. Some families want to focus on the joy of their loved one's life, and others want to focus on the professional achievements. Some want only clergy to speak. Others are comfortable with spontaneous testimonials. Either way, those constraints influence what the primary speaker does and how he does it. Constraints, though, are not absolute. Even with these constraints, the speaker has room to be creative and strategic. A great example from your textbook is when First Lady Barbara Bush spoke at the commencement at Wellesley College in 1990. The speech occurred after the first choice of Wellesley College, who was Alice Walker, the author of The Color Purple, declined her invitation. More than a quarter of the graduating class signed a petition because they believed that Mrs. Bush was not a great role model for career-minded women, and they were not happy. They believed she was chosen because she was the president's wife. This made national news for over a month. And now, she did such a great job of fitting the speech to the occasion that it's now in the top 100 speeches in the country. Let's take a listen to just part of this speech.
At the end of your life, you will never regret not having passed one more test, winning one more verdict, or not closing one more deal. You will regret time not spent with a husband, a child, a friend, or a parent. We are in a transitional period right now. The parents. We are in a transitional period right now, fascinating and exhilarating times, learning to adjust to changes and the choices we, men and women, are facing. As an example, I remember what a friend said on hearing her husband complain to his buddies that he had to babysit. Quickly setting him straight, my friend told her husband that when it's your own kids, it's not called babysitting. Now, maybe we should adjust faster, maybe we should adjust slower. But whatever the era, whatever the times, one thing will never change. Fathers and mothers, if you have children, they must come first. You must read to your children, and you must hug your children, and you must love your children. Your success as a family, our success as a society, depends not on what happens in the White House, but on what happens inside your house. For over 50 years, it was said that the winner of Wellesley's annual hoop race would be the first to get married. Now they say the winner will be the first to become a CEO. Both of those stereotypes show too little tolerance for those who want to know where the mermaids stand. So, So I want to offer a new legend. The winner of the hoop race will be the first to realize her dream, not society's dreams, her own personal dream. And who knows? Somewhere out in this audience may even be someone who will one day follow in my footsteps and preside over the White House as the president's spouse, and I wish him well.
Mrs. Bush did a lot of things really well in that speech, but one way to describe it across the board was that she demonstrated an incredible amount of decorum. I mean, imagine being invited to deliver a speech like this and then finding out your audience, your target audience, the graduates, are not interested in having you there. They are so not interested that they are protesting and signing petitions. That's a pretty tough walk-in. So what is decorum? What is it that she did so well? She demonstrated an appropriateness to the occasion, both in the speech itself, her delivery, and her poise. And that's something that's a really tough thing to do. So what is the opposite of decorum, which is one of the things they teach us when we teach us how to be teachers, is that showing what is and what is not helps to clarify what something is. So lately we've had some examples of what is not decorum. Decorum can come from the expectations of the audience, but it can also come from the rules of the organization. So it would never be expected in either of these cases that somebody would rip up the script of the State of the Union address, no matter who the speaker was or how they felt about the delivery. And it would never be expected that we would attack the reporters. That would not be what we consider appropriate for an occasion. So that's what decorum is not. All right, so you've got that. Let's focus on what it is, which comes from Cicero, who wrote about the rules of conduct suited to ordinary folk. So it really does come from what are the expectations. But then it's evolved a little bit to include the practical application of it, and occasionally in very formal organizations like the Senate and a lot of other companies use this with their board of directors. Robert's Rules of Order are usually included in a statement of decorum. Decorum has 6 elements that go into it. So let's take a quick look at what those are. The first one is formality, and that determines the substance and the delivery style of the speech. Remember, a manuscript speech is much more formal than an extemporaneous speech. The length of the speech also is connected to decorum. Usually the length reflects the importance of the topic, but across the board, brevity is preferred, especially in the short attention span world we live in now. The use of emotion has to be balanced and appropriate. Evoking the wrong kind or too much of one can drive the audience away rather than motivate or uplift them, which is often what special occasion speeches are designed to do. Intensity is maybe the biggest challenge of decorum. Each occasion dictates the degree of intensity required, and that often comes from delivery, but sometimes it comes from the choice of words too, depending on the topic, the situation. We have supporting material. Different occasions call for different types of supporting material. A lot of ceremonial speeches don't call for the scholarly references we've been talking about with persuasive and informative speeches, but rather testimonials and stories about the person or the situation. And finally, identification. Speakers have to seek to establish a common bond with the audience, figure out what you have in common with them and their situation, and they might be implied, but sometimes they're explicit, and you need to capitalize on those. So how do you know if you have achieved decorum? Well, does the speech capture the thoughts and emotions appropriate to the occasion? If the answer to that is yes, then you've achieved decorum with your speech. And that's a big deal. That's a really big deal. Another guideline for creating a special occasion speech is that, like every other message, we have to be clear about the purpose. And it can be any of the three general purposes: inform, persuade, or entertain. Though most often we think of them as entertaining. Special occasions occur at government events, commercial events, or even in schools. You could see a teacher there doing a special thing about animals in looks like a preschool kind of classroom. So special occasion speeches can even have dual purposes, like informing and entertaining, or informing and persuading. They could even help audiences re-experience a common past, create positive or negative feelings. They can even induce action. The key is to be very clear on the purpose and match it to the audience, just like every other speech we talk about. So what kinds of occasions do we have? Well, we're going to start with the really academic version that we're calling the 3 Aristotelian occasions, based on Aristotle's time. And there are 3 fundamental occasions for speaking, and one is forensic. Forensic refers to speaking in court, and it tends to elicit feelings of guilt or innocence and relies on past behavior. So attorneys are most often the people we think of, or the speakers we think of. The second kind is epideictic. It's a big word, and it refers to speaking in ceremonial situations. You have Will Ferrell here. I started to say Will Smith. These are always related to praise or blame in ceremonial situations, but they're usually focused on social issues, and they're informed by the virtues and values of the audience or the organization. You can see here examples might include commencement in epideictic speaking, but you could also have retirement speeches or eulogies. And the third occasion is deliberative. So these are actually, another way to think of these are 3 types of rhetoric: forensic rhetoric, epideictic rhetoric, and deliberative rhetoric. And this refers to occasions when a course of action has to be determined, whether something should or should not be done. So legislative rhetoric or political rhetoric is often about you should vote for this, we should support this bill, that kind of thing. It requires that the speaker be adept at understanding how thoughts are related to the audience, and it occurs when 2 conditions arise. We have to answer when what to do is not self-evident. And it also occurs when a decision is required. So that's usually when we become deliberative in our public speaking, or find that that's really the purpose at this point. The answer about what we should do is just not terribly clear, or a decision is required and we got to get some action on it. Got to get people to choose. So most of our political rhetoric is deliberative. So we're going to spend some time now talking about deliberative rhetoric in more detail. And then we'll spend some time talking about epidictic rhetoric in more detail, and that's the bulk of what we're going to do for the rest of this unit. So what are some occasions where we would have deliberative rhetoric? One of them is community service, and this is the way in which most of us will be an active participant in the public forum and use deliberative rhetoric. It can be anything like the parent-teacher organization, professional conventions, civic groups, and this active participation can really be particularly meaningful to us as citizens of our community. Oral reports and presentations are also common forms of deliberative speaking or deliberative rhetoric. We need to make sure, if we are doing this kind of speech, to choose an organizational pattern that fits the purpose of what you're trying to accomplish. And in order to be effective, we have to highlight how the appeal or the information reflects the values of the decision makers. So you always want to figure out who that target audience is, even if it's an informing speech, and make sure that you connect what you're sharing with their values and virtues. Group presentations, which of course probably having a lot of those in Zoom world these days, are also pretty common ways of deliberative speaking. This has got all kinds of layers in it. Let's highlight a couple of terms first. A series of related group reports presented in a panel is known as a symposium. And so if you have one person per group, and there's like 5 groups, one person presents their findings or their idea or any whatever they're presenting, that would be called a symposium. Another word that you need to be familiar with, or term you need to be familiar with, is groupthink. And this is when people in the group lose sight of their personal responsibility for group decisions. So this is just something you need to be aware of as the speaker, that if people are making the choice while you are still delivering your message and you're facilitating that conversation as the speaker, then you need to be aware that sometimes people decide, I don't want to keep talking because I don't want to get bullied. So it's our responsibility to prevent groupthink, which the essence of groupthink is bullying. People choose to stop talking or sharing relevant information because they fear the response of other group members. It's our responsibility to make sure everyone has an opportunity to talk. There's also some information in your textbook about chairing a meeting in this section on group presentations, and I encourage you to take a look at that. Another way that we could see deliberative speaking occur is in public hearings and debates. And so in public hearings, you might provide testimony, which is a brief deliberative speech in an effort to persuade the people who have the decision-making power to go with your point of view. You could also see it in a debate, which might be in a public forum, but it also could be for sport. And debating means not only presenting speeches, but also responding to statements of opposition. So you would choose a position, and then somebody else would choose a position that's opposite of yours. And you would not only give your perspective, but you would also respond to that person's perspective. They can be pretty structured and governed by a lot of rules. They can also be both informative and persuasive. So the last way that we're going to talk about deliberative speaking, the last occasion, is responding to questions. And I wanted to let you know that we're not going to cover this in detail here because there's a fantastic video that's linked here to a Stanford Graduate School of Business program that created a video probably for a class project. But this is a skill that's entirely different than delivering the speech. Responding to questions is expected of many speakers, and it's an opportunity for the audience to get detail and clarify what's going on. It's often challenging for speakers. It can be pretty confrontational and argumentative. People can get pretty riled up. And that's why I want you to watch their presentation on your own time and read this part of the textbook on your own time, because it's always fabulous to get some applied information, and they do a great job. So it's about a 10-minute video. That's why we're not watching it together in this video lecture, but I have posted it on Blackboard for you. So let's recap what we've covered on deliberative speaking. We covered some background and definitions. We covered occasions for deliberative speaking, which include community service and involvement. You might have oral reports and presentations, could be a group presentation, could be public hearings and debates, and then also an element about responding to questions, which you're responsible for on your own time. The more usual way we think of special occasion speaking is ceremonies. So let's spend some time there. Ceremonial speaking includes speeches of greeting, tributes, and commemorations. And just highlighting a couple of the characteristics of any kind of ceremonial speaking, they usually help build a sense of community. It's either characteristics of ceremonial speaking. They help build a sense of community. They often include humor. They also, just like the deliberative, somehow identify or highlight common values and beliefs, but their purpose in doing it is usually not to convince someone of something, but rather to build community. And they often at least highlight some shared history. Now, the one other characteristic of ceremonial speaking is creating resonance. And that is the speaker's ability to articulate the audience's unexpressed feelings. A really good ceremonial speaker figures out what the audience is feeling and then tells them that, but does it in a way that the audience doesn't realize, oh, wow, he said that perfectly. She really captured what I was feeling. And that's why ceremonial speaking is really challenging. So the characteristics: sense of community, humor, identifying common values and beliefs, highlighting a shared history, and establishing resonance. So let's look at the first type of ceremonial speaking, and that is speeches of greeting in the form of introductions and welcomes. So there are two ways this happens. Gratefully, we have a clip from Bridget Jones' diary to show us how not to do either of these. In this clip, she is an assistant at a publishing house in England. She's a little intoxicated and nervous about speaking in public, both just because of who she is, but also because she has an awkward history with two men in her audience. There's a little bit of off-colored language, so please adapt your volume accordingly. Let's watch.
Ladies and gentlemen, ladies and Oi! Sorry, the mic's not working. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the launch of Kafka's Motorbike, the greatest book of our time. Obviously, except for your books, Mr. Rushdie, which are also very good. And Lord Archer, yours aren't bad either. Anyway, what I mean is, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming to the launch of one of the top 30 books of our time. Anyway, at least. And here to introduce it properly is the man we all call, Tits Pervert. Mr. Tits Pervert. Mr. Tits Pervert. Fitzherbert. Because that is his name. Mr. Fitzherbert, thank you.
Thank you, Brenda. Just switch this on.
So you gotta love Bridget Jones for getting through an awkward situation in the most awkward way possible, right? Let's look at the two types of greeting speeches and what we actually should be doing so we don't pull a Bridget Jones. The first type of greeting speech is an introduction. And what we need to do to introduce a guest or a guest speaker is pretty small time, and hopefully it's what most of us have learned through experience. But we just highlight selected achievements. We want to praise them, but minimally, because if we give them too much, then we set an expectation that's probably unreachable. It's always extemporaneous. It needs to be natural and seems like it comes from the heart. And we want to make sure, this is a big deal, that we have correct pronunciations, particularly of that person's name. The goal of an introduction speech is to make the speaker feel welcome and share relevant information, and also to bolster the speaker's ethos, to bolster that person's ethos. So to do that, focus on those selected achievements with a little bit of praise, make sure we get the correct pronunciations, and do it extemporaneously. A welcome speech is to introduce the guest to a host and make the guest feel comfortable. That's all it is. It's even shorter than an introduction speech. It could be like 30 seconds, maybe a minute or two, just to welcome somebody. And then they aren't necessarily going to be speaking. You're just welcoming them to the organization or to that event. Another form of ceremonial speaking is tributes. And those are when we honor someone in a special way. And the first kind we're going to look at are testimonials. This is one type of tribute speech, and they honor a person by focusing on their accomplishments. We do a testimonial speech with vivid, descriptive language. We usually try to include something that's a little less familiar to everyone who knows this person. And we try to minimize or avoid including references to us as the speaker. Importantly, they do not exaggerate the virtues of a person. We're going to watch an example of Billy Crystal honoring the late Robin Williams, fabulous, gifted comedian and actor. You'll see that Billy Crystal violates the rule of not including himself, but his inclusion in this speech is kind of inconsequential because it just sets the stage for something he's telling us about Robin Williams. Remember that the constraints of special occasion speaking are not absolute. So it's okay if you have to say something about yourself to set up a great story about the person you're honoring.
He made us laugh hard every time you saw him on television, movies, nightclubs, arenas, hospitals, homeless shelters for our troops overseas, and even in a dying girl's living room for her last wish. He made us laugh big time. I spent many happy hours with Robin on stage. I mean, the brilliance was astounding. The relentless energy was kind of thrilling. I used to think if I could just put a saddle on him and stay on for 8 seconds, I was going to do okay. Robin, Whoopi, and I once were in Shea Stadium in the broadcast booth with the great Tim McCarver. It was Comic Relief Day for the New York Mets, and Robin knew nothing about baseball. I asked him, "What's your favorite team?" and he said, "The San Franciscos." So he was a little lost in the conversation, so I got an idea, and I said, "You know, Tim, we have a great Russian baseball player with us." And I looked over, his eyes got all bright, his ears perked up. It was like he was a little dog that was inside all day, and the master came and said, "Hey, you want to go for a walk?" So I said, "What's baseball like in Russia?" Without missing a beat, he said, "Well, we only have one team, the Reds." Well, the next pitch, the batter foul went off. It came screaming back at us. We ducked down. It slammed against the wall. Robin turned around and bounced into his hand, and he stood up and screamed, "I love America, I'm gonna defect." He could be funny anywhere. We were such close friends. He would come to all of our great family functions, weddings, bar mitzvahs, that kind of thing. And He would sit with my older immigrant relatives, like he was one of the guys. And he would tell them about his journey from his little shtetl in Poland to America. One uncle of mine said, "I came to America after World War II and I hitchhiked." And Robin said, "I waited till there was a 747 and a kosher meal." Well, as genius as he was on stage, he was the greatest friend you could ever imagine. Supportive, protective, loving. It's very hard to talk about him in the past because he was so present in all of our lives. For almost 40 years, he was the brightest star in a comedy galaxy. But while some of the brightest of our celestial bodies are actually extinct now, their energy long since cooled, but miraculously, because they float in the heavens so far away from us now, their beautiful light will continue to shine on us forever. And the glow will be so bright, it'll warm your heart, it'll make your eyes glisten, and you'll think to yourselves, Robin Williams, what a concept.
And yet look, vile fool, come thee hither. No! Thou hast forced me to wear designer jeans for no reason. I will walk now, and cameramen shall be going, where's he going now? Where am I now? Let me borrow your little shawl. We've never met before, have we?
I came to Bombay last year.
I would like to welcome you to Iran. Help me! God gives, it gives you a penis and a brain, and only enough blood to run one at a time. There are times my son looks at me and gives me that look in the eyes like,
well, what's it gonna be?
I don't know. But maybe along the way, he'd take my hand, tell a few jokes, and have some fun. Come on, pal. You're not afraid, are you?
Nah.
After that moving testimonial speech by Billy Crystal, we can see that testimonial speeches highlight accomplishments, they use vivid descriptive language, they include some less familiar information or stories about that person, minimize or avoid including references to self, and they don't exaggerate the virtues of a person. Another type of tribute speech is a eulogy, and the purpose of these is to praise the dead. In these speeches, we share examples of virtue demonstrated by the deceased, and we also limit self-references here. It's mostly focusing on the virtues of the deceased. They're positive in tone. They do magnify the strengths, but not extraordinarily, and they minimize the weaknesses of the person. Gratefully, we have a terrific clip of a live eulogy, which isn't something that's usually filmed. It is Barack Obama's eulogy delivery for the Honorable Elijah Cummings, a congressman from Baltimore. This is just an excerpt, but I think it gives you an example of what a eulogy's tone is. So let's listen.
As president, I knew I could always count on Elijah being honorable and doing the right thing. And people have talked about his voice. There is something about his voice that just made you feel better. There's some people, they have that deep baritone, a prophetic voice. And when it was good times and we achieved victories together, that voice and that laugh was a gift. But you needed it more during the tough times, when the path ahead looked crooked, when obstacles abounded. When I entertained doubts, or I saw those who were in the fight start to waver, that's when Elijah's voice mattered most. And more than once during my presidency, when the economy still looked like it might plunge into depression, when the health care bill was pronounced dead in Congress, I would watch Elijah rally his colleagues. The cost of doing nothing isn't nothing, he would say. And folks would remember why they entered into public service. Our children are the living messengers we send to a future we will never see, he would say. And he would remind all of us that our time is too short not to fight for what's good and what is true and what is best in America. "200 years to 300 years from now," he would say, "people will look back at this moment and they will ask the question, what did you do?" And hearing him, we would be reminded that it falls upon each of us to give voice to the voiceless and comfort to the sick, an opportunity to those not born to it, and to preserve and nurture our democracy. Elijah Cummings was a man of noble and good heart. His parents and his faith planted the seeds of hope and love and compassion and righteousness in that good soil of his. He has harvested all the crop that he could. For the Lord has now called Elijah home to give his humble, faithful servant rest.
Okay, that was very, very powerful, and you can tell it was quite heartfelt. Let's move away from this heavy, although very powerful public speaking, and move into something a little lighter, roasts. It's another type of tribute speech, and they honor and poke fun at the honoree. They poke fun at the topic, the person. Humor is essential. It is the main ingredient, although it does highlight the strengths of somebody through humor. These are particularly challenging speeches for most of us. Comedy Central roasts celebrities fairly regularly, but annually there is a White House Correspondents' Dinner where the president gets roasted. We're going to check in on a segment from the very first year that President Obama was there, where Wanda Sykes is the comedian who roasts President Obama.
It really is. And I keep getting asked the same question, you know, are you nervous? Are you nervous? I'm like, with this administration, what is there to be nervous about? You know, if I do a good job, I get great press. If I screw it up royally, Tim Geithner will give me a bonus. But, you know, I understand, because it's hard to poke fun at the president, you know, because he's so likable. Everybody likes, you know, his T-shirts and bumper stickers, and listening to the radio, and people are dedicating songs, you know. I like to send out Always and Forever to Mr. President. You know, people love you, you know, and even the media, you know, you guys have been very favorable towards the president. You know, it's funny to me that they've never caught you smoking, but they somehow always catch you with your shirt off. I know you're into this transparency thing, but I don't need to see your nipples. Is there a beach at Camp David? What the hell? You know, there was never a nipple portrait of Lincoln. I'm sorry.
So that's a pretty good clip, and we can see the essence of a roast. I got to listen to an interview of Wanda Sykes talking about how she prepped for that and how funny it was, but also challenging. And she was nervous because she wanted to honor him well, but she said it was just hard to choose which things to make fun of. Another, actually the last type of tribute speech is also more lighthearted, and that is a toast. Toast speeches are mini versions of the testimonials. The honoree, the person being honored, is present, usually celebrates just 1 to 3 characteristics of that person. And I'm going to show you an example of a poetic toast at a wedding just because it's lighthearted and fun. And it's mostly in good taste, but probably still okay for any group of adults.
I wrote a little poem for the new bride and groom in the style of Uncle Charlie, in the style of Dr. Seuss. So, sitting here, bound both by laws and by rings, surrounded by loved ones and treated like kings. Your love is apparent and really quite awesome. It's cool to recall how you both made it blossom. Jer, I was worried way back in the day that Magic the Gathering would drive girls away. But being a geek, bro, you totally owned it and wooed several ladies, much to your nerd credit. But none of them ever became quite the one. Until you met Anya, then your game was done. A woman quite lovely, your own holy grail, a copy of you with a long ponytail. Since your first date in college in early September, a moment I'm sure you must fondly remember. You've gone through a lot, what with school and with work, and your brother's hot six-pack performing in surf. But enough about me. Back to you and your wife, and to roasting and toasting you both on this night. I'm sure that by now I've used up all my time, but I'm going to keep going with this corny rhyme. A BS in computing, 2 masters to boot. You've found your true calling, your one real pursuit. Theoretical computing, whatever that is. Got you hired by Google, you programming whiz. Now to switch up the mood to a serious note. You've become quite the man, Jer, but don't start to gloat. I've known you forever, and I'm proud to say that it's a true honor to stand here today. You found quite the woman. She's perfect for you. Your love for each other is seen through and through. I wish you a lifetime of pleasure and bliss, and laughter and smiles and love with your miss. Speaking of Anya, the beautiful bride, don't worry, you sister, there's no need to hide. She's joined with our clan, with pomp and with glitz. She's finally done it. She's come to her wits. But who is more awesome than this blushing bride? A genius who's worked with magnesium chloride. Be good to my brother and treat him with care, especially once he starts losing his hair. To both of you lovebirds on this festive day, I wrote one last rhyme to your utter dismay. My final thought won't be too brilliant or novel, and probably won't make your giant brains bobble. Though I've only been married 1 year and 2 weeks, I've learned a few lessons in marriage techniques. Hold hands and speak freely and say, I love you. And until you want children, use condoms to screw. Your lives won't be totally different tomorrow, but now you have someone for good times and sorrow. You'll get back to life when this party is done, but since you're together, you'll always have fun. To my brother, the Nerd King, and Anya, his wife, I wish you both the most wonderful life. So everyone, raise up your glasses so tall, and congratulate the couple with So Say We All.
So say we all. Woo! That's a terrific toast, isn't it? I'm so glad that he was able to do that so well and share it on YouTube so we can use it as an example. It's fantastic toast. All right, so that's 4 types of tribute speeches: testimonial, eulogy, roast, and toast. Another type of ceremonial speech is a commemorative speech, and this is a remembrance delivered on the anniversary of an event. It can be any kind of event, but it's usually an anniversary of something that was a big deal. In these images, you can see President Clinton delivering a commemorative speech on the anniversary of the bombing in Oklahoma City. And that bottom image there is the way the memorial looks when it's lit up at night. These speeches may recount the story of the event, but they relate virtues of the organization or the community of people and of the event to the lives of the audience. And that's, it's all about lifting people up. And there's often especially in ones where there is lives lost, a moment of sadness, but mostly it's about heartwarming and a little bit of solemnity and honoring. Presentation speeches establish the importance of the award itself. Why is this a big deal? And then they say, this is all the stuff that you have to be able to do and do well to get this award. So they establish the fitness to receive the award. They might highlight the selection process, and occasionally, depending on the circumstances, they acknowledge the other finalists. That's usually a good idea to appreciate those folks as well. If you're accepting an award, then obviously the number one thing is to demonstrate gratitude for the award and the honor. And you want to demonstrate appreciation for those who did not win, the other finalists, anybody who participated, and those who made the award possible. Maybe it's a foundation, maybe it's a community of people. Usually you want to acknowledge the folks who made the final decision and demonstrate your understanding of the values that are underlying the award. How important it is to try to demonstrate, and what hard work it is to demonstrate those values. So award speeches are another form of ceremonial speaking. And you have two versions of that, presentation and acceptance. All right, so we've hit a lot of epidictic speech types. Let's take a look at a quick recap here. In greeting speeches, we have introduction and welcome. In tribute speeches, we have toasts and roasts. And then we also have eulogies and testimonials. We have commemorative speeches, which is just one version, and then award speeches, which are presentation and acceptance. Nice work, guys. So we've covered deliberative rhetoric, and we've covered epidictic rhetoric. All right, gang, another version is when these types of speeches combine, and the focus is to move people to action and celebrate. So we've got deliberative and epidictic combined, or deliberative and ceremonial combined. Now, I'm leaving this up to you, this section, and the reason I'm leaving it up to you is because these are ones you've often seen, because think pep talk and think keynote address and think graduation or commencement address. You've seen a lot of these, but take a look at that section in the textbook, and also in the PowerPoint on Blackboard, you will see a few slides to highlight the hits of those. All right, that puts us at the end of our unit, and let's take a look at where we've been. We covered decorum and how important it is to know that you have achieved appropriateness in your speech. We covered the definitions and the highlights of the Aristotelian occasions, right? Or the rhetorics, which are deliberative, forensic, and epidictic. Be careful to consider your purpose. That's how you make sure you get a message that's appropriate and your delivery is appropriate. Deliberative speaking occurs in community involvement, reports and presentations type places. Ceremonial speaking occurs more in greetings, tributes, commemorative, and awards. Some speeches have a dual purpose. And as always, all I have to say is thank you for your time and attention. It's been real.